The Chinese Americans is brought to you by the Charles B. Wang Foundation, which shares public television's mission of bringing to viewers the highest accomplishments of our society, along with an understanding of its rich diversity and the commonality of its people. And by the financial support of viewers like you.
We first came to this country more than 200 years ago, forced by wrenching poverty and political turmoil to leave our beloved homeland, our ancestral villages, and our ancient ways. We set sail for America, a land of such mythic wealth and opportunity we called it Gamsan, the Golden Mountain. As Easterners in a nation settled mainly by Europeans, we were outsiders. Times were often hard, but our culture and time-honored traditions gave us strength. And through our hard work and perseverance, we earned not just respect, but the right to proudly call ourselves Chinese Americans. Whether our families have been here for 2 years or 200, we understand what it means to be Chinese.
In spite of the fact that I've been in America 60-some years, I'm still Chinese, because of those first 17, 18 years, because I was born there, brought up there, and that's important.
I happen to be an American citizen, and I happen to be very Americanized, but I'm Chinese. So a hyphenated person sounds to me as if you're half this and half that, and I'm not. It's all kind of together.
I'm glad that some of the things that have come from the Chinese culture have permeated into who I am. The idea of being patient. You look at Chinese culture of thousands of years old, this is a very patient culture, it's a very persevering culture. We endure.
We are children of both East and West, a duality reflected even in the names we're given at birth.
My English name is Janet Yang. My Chinese name is far more poetic. It's Yang Yanzi. It's a very non-revolutionary name. It's actually refers to the swallow, which is very common in Chinese poetry.
My surname is He, and my given name is Da Yi, which in simple translation means big and one, or big one, or as my father would like to say, it means the great one.
Li is my family name, which is the largest family name in China now. There are more Lis than any other surname people in the world.
The Chinese community is not homogeneous, and when people look at us, they see us in terms of stereotypes, either as a laundryman or restaurant person or as a model minority kid. They always see us in terms of black and white. But actually, the Chinese who come to the United States are very diverse. They come not only from Guangdong and Toisan, but from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, from the Caribbean, from Vietnam, from Burma.
Our forefathers found ways into this country, even when they weren't wanted.
My father and mother used a lot of wisdom to come to this country. My dad came over posing as a Filipino named Ricardo Torres during a time when our country had the Exclusion Act, which made it very difficult for the Chinese to come here. But one of the ways that he could get into this country was to pose as a non-Chinese. So he cleverly moved to the Philippines, lived there for several years, and then bought a piece of paper that said, in fact, his name was Ricardo Torres. That's why my last name is so unusual, Fong Torres, with the hyphen.
When my father was growing up, there's not much going on in Toisan, and also it's a very poor area. The soil is not very very fertile, and it's very hard to grow. So as farmers, they really are not able to really produce a lot of food. So that's the reason why in this particular area in southern part of China, a lot of them immigrated to North America.
My parents are from China. My father being from Shanghai, Ningbo to be precise, and my mother from Hunan province, which is the birthplace of Chairman Mao. They came over in the late 40s as students, met here, got married, planned to go back to China always, and waited and waited for that right time to come, and it never came. My parents, being of an intellectual background, decided that their education would be a liability for them in China.
My great-grandfather came from Canton to hit the gold rush in 1849, and like many immigrants, found a lot of hardship. But my family stayed in California. My great-grandfather was a common, ordinary laborer.
Actually, our forefathers were extraordinary laborers. They burrowed through the Western Mountains faster than anyone imagined possible, and played an important role in the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. In the San Joaquin Valley, they dug hundreds of miles of irrigation trenches and introduced new crops and farming methods, which turned the valley into the richest agricultural region in the world. But in return, they were ostracized and subject to ridicule and violence. Because of that, we tended to live apart. Some of our grandparents put down roots in small country towns, but most settled in the big cities on the west and east coasts.
I was quite young, and I've never left my family before, certainly not for such long distances from Shanghai to East Coast, actually. But I must confess that I wasn't that concerned about my family. I was very happy to leave. Why? Because of the expectation to see a new world.
But after a long journey by ship and railroad, followed by the interrogations of immigration officials, many of us sought the familiar sights, sounds, and smells of Chinatown.
Well, the business was my grandfather with other people in the community. 1891, as near as we can tell. It was an herbalist. It was a general store, basically. It was a mail drop for a lot of people. It's my understanding that if you go to Ellis Island and you look at people's addresses, the Chinese, many thousands, all lived in one building. It's 32 Mott Street. But in fact, they didn't live there. That was the mail drop. Then they dispersed all over the eastern United States and would come back and check and see if their mail was there, see what they had.
Chinatown provided not just a link to our roots, it was a place where we found companionship and support. It became our extended family.
There's a place for people after work, they come over here, they can socialize a little bit, drink a cup of tea, and then share a lot of their family stories and things. So this is a great place for people. Yes. I remember my father used to come to places like this, and your father, your grandfather, they all come to this place to communicate, to share, and it's a great place. Everybody can enjoy a cup of tea after work.
I think that's real important, especially here in Chinatown, to know that it's a very self-contained community. And so the Chinese still bond and they help each other out in all ways. So some of the elderly Chinese do not ever have to leave this community. Everything is here. The laundry, the food, the theater, groceries, restaurants. And then when they want to bond, they either go to Portsmouth Square to relax or they go to their own association.
Our grandparents and parents wanted us to have the best America had to offer. They also wanted us to understand and appreciate the Chinese values they held so dear.
I'm grateful to my father and mother for extending to me the Confucius teaching, such as Lai Yi Lim Qi, Hao Dai Zhong Sen, and many Chinese Confucius values that affected my life. And as I grew older, I became more interested in learning of the Chinese classics and the relevancy of the Chinese classic and the values to the American way of living.
When you grow up Asian, especially Chinese, you're taught by your parents not to draw attention to yourself, because the philosophy is that the family is more important than the individual. The community is more important than the individual. So your actions are driven by the needs and priorities of the community or your family.
I don't remember any no wise sayings. My grandfather was more philosophical, and it was a great influence in my life. I remember he would never let somebody who's on the street asking for money go by without giving them something. That kind of a generous spirit was something that I have not forgotten.
There's no question in my mind whatsoever that my parents have been the guiding force of my life, and what I've learned from them and received from them has made all the difference. We learned values, not slogans, and I think the values continue to be at the core of everything that I do, everything that my sister does, whether we've liked it or not.
My parents were very moralistic. I mean, nothing would offend them more than hypocrisy or distortion of the truth. The few times my father would really lose his temper was if he caught me or my brother lying. And so we were very, very committed as a family, I think, to many values that most people would consider Christian. Yet we were, for the most part, a family of agnostics.
In America, we've been free to practice all of the religions our culture has adopted over the centuries.
The Chinese are much more tolerant toward religious beliefs. They believe that any religion that teaches people to be good is all right. So you can be a Christian, and you can be a Taoist, and you can be a Buddhist. By that way, you can cover all the bases to get to heaven.
My father, I don't think he cared much about religion, really. He was very much like me in some ways, sort of an agnostic. But my mother became very, very convinced of one thing, that Buddhism was the way of life.
When I was a little girl, I went to temples with my grandmother, who was a devout Buddhist. She was illiterate and she was uneducated. She was just an ordinary woman, but she was so kind and generous, was willing to give anybody anything she had. And I think that left very deep impressions on me.
Guidance and inspiration easily cross the Pacific Ocean to lead this Zuchi Buddhist group as they nurture the inner life, and then meet to discuss the various activities of charity and community service.
I read on the wall, I see all that, I say, oh, if I could only...
The local temples we've built provide a link not just to our homeland, but to each other and to our future.
Here is Masu.
Masu.
So we pray to the
That's
goddess.
the Masu.
That is the Masu. There it comes. There you go.
Okay.
48.
This is 48. How
Oh my
wonderful.
goodness!
Interesting. 48. Let's check our fortune. Come on here. Your heart's delight will probably it will be fulfilled. That's very good fortune.
I don't remember my parents ever talking about religion or faith or philosophy, but I was a seeker as a child, and I wanted to have a religion, and I knew I wasn't Jewish, and I couldn't go to the temple as all my friends did, although I went to bar mitzvahs and seders. So they took me to the nearest church, which happened to be a Baptist church, and I expected for years that Jesus would tap me on the shoulder and save me one day as I was in the supermarket or whatever.
My family was not Christian. We went to the church because that was a good place where they would teach you to be good. The church was Chinese. That was more or less the only social institution that people like us could associate with. They provided a lot of services. They taught English language. When you had trouble, you went to the Chinese minister and he would try to help you out.
When I was growing up, there was no talk about church. If anything, my parents just said if you're bad, like the devils will come and get you. So we never went to church. There was no religion that was promoted to us at all.
I'm a Lutheran, okay? I was raised as a Lutheran. My grandfather, with members of the community, raised a lot of money to build this building that we're in right now. Yet I remember as a young child going to the cemetery of my grandfather with my whole family and doing the things that are really the ancestor worship traditions, which was putting out the 3 cups of wine, bringing oranges, bringing fresh-made roast pork buns. And I always wondered as we left, who's eating this? We left it at the gravesite, and I never figured out, who gets to eat all that stuff. But anyway, we did it. That was the traditional thing to do, and yet we were Lutherans. I was married here, I was baptized here. Let's see, my sister had her wedding here. It's an important piece of the community.
In a lot of ways, I think a lot of people found our first friends and connections, and in particular our first, I guess, fellow Chinese Americans. Growing up as we did, surrounded by non-Chinese, non-Asians, the church then ended up being a source for, in a way, an extended family.
In the cities and suburbs of America, we greet one another in Mandarin, Cantonese, Fukienese, and English. As the threads of our lives are being woven into the fabric of American life, we continue to learn and grow. But like those who came before us, we still face many challenges.
I think every ethnic group has to contend with their own particular stereotype. They bear their own particular burdens. But the particular burden that Asian Americans deal with is this idea of being perpetual foreigners.
Washington is a town I grew up in. It was quite an international community. But nonetheless, it was different for some people to encounter someone who was Chinese. And I remember early on, some levels of discrimination. The kids would say, "Can you see the ceiling and the floor because your eyes are like this?" Really. And it was, and I used to make jokes about it. I always found that if I joked about it before anyone else did, then, then they wouldn't make a joke about me.
It was funny because at the time I grew up, there was less of a cultural awareness. I think we, as a population, hadn't reached critical mass yet in this city. And there were times where the Asian kids would try to compete with each other to see who could be more white.
We would, my sister and I, participate in just about everything that our neighbors did, our friends did, our classmates did. But there was always something that made it feel like we were just a little bit different, for instance. And the food that our parents had prepared for us, while delicious, was not the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that our friends would eat. When we brought friends home, there were little customs and traditions that our white friends wouldn't understand or have never run across. Things like taking off your shoes before you step into the house, or my parents would speak one language at the dinner table and we'd respond in English. These were small things, but I think especially when you're going through adolescence, you're dealing with issues like appearance, you're dealing with issues like acceptance, and these things are harder when you're one in a crowd as opposed to one of the crowd.
Even as we sought to assimilate, we knew our first responsibility was to our family.
Dating, wow. I'm one of probably the oldest people to start dating. Dating was not in our vocabulary. When I was growing up, if I was asked out in high school, it was just an absolute no. We usually had household responsibilities, or we went off to help at the restaurant. I think that most Chinese our age, of my generation, which was growing up in the 1960s, if our parents were immigrants, our parents worked very, very hard. And there was just absolutely no room for us to complain or to say that, our friends are having a party, can we go? We just knew. We don't even talk about it.
We were expected to find Chinese husbands and wives and raise our children the way we were raised.
By the time I got married, my parents were so happy that I was getting married. They were starting to give up on me. Much earlier, they had hoped that I would meet a nice Chinese man, preferably somebody who was a doctor or second best lawyer. That didn't happen, and I would say to my mother, Mom, where am I going to find these perfect Chinese men?
Sometimes our dual identity was confusing.
Now, many of my students, when I was teaching them, would say to me, my father and mother don't love me. They never kissed me, they never hugged me. But this is not the traditional Chinese way. Fathers and mothers, they try to stay aloof from their children because they want to maintain authority.
Even as our families prospered, we were expected to sacrifice and save as our parents had.
Conspicuous consumption. You know how the United States, they love to have things, buy this, buy that, buy the other, whereas the Chinese culture emphasizes more on thrift, how much you can save.
Our traditional ways sometimes left us ill-prepared for the rough and tumble of American life.
The Chinese people tend to be more passive. And I guess in Confucius they say the sage, the gentleman uses his mind and his brains, not his fists. And so young men, young boys in particular, have a hard time in the schoolyards because they are challenged and you have to defend yourself.
Bruce Lee was a big hero to a lot of Asian kids growing up. I mean, because growing up in the 60s, essentially, you just didn't see anyone on TV who looked like you, except maybe the cook on Bonanza, and you didn't want to grow up to be the cook on Bonanza. And that a lot of the characters were kind of either inhumanly bad, sort of the Fu Manchu model, or inhumanly good, sort of the Charlie Chan model. I mean, they could be doing good things, but they still didn't seem like people, So Bruce Lee came along, and he was a hero, and he was masculine and empowered, and so he was great for a lot of us as kind of an image of ourselves.
Fitting into American society was not easy, especially when we were trying to balance two cultures and two languages.
When I was a little girl, the only language that was spoken at home was Chinese. I remember as a child that while I was walking home from school with my brother, we played this game where after we got to a certain block, we had to start speaking Chinese because we did not want to be punished by our parents.
We're an immigrant family. When we arrived, my father had purchased a house in the neighborhood surrounding USC, which actually is primarily a black neighborhood. And I went to school with, I would say, about 3/4 of the kids being black, and then the rest whites, Asians, and etc. Trying to learn English, trying to not appear like a complete dummy. But it was most difficult because one can't even understand the simplest instruction from the teacher. But I'm glad to say that the kids have a great deal of flexibility and a great deal ability to learn very quickly, and I and my brother were able to comprehend enough to get by in school within a couple of months.
I do know growing up one advantage to my parents having English as their second language is that if we used dirty words in English, they didn't get it. It went right over their heads, so we got away with that.
I had an aunt, in fact, who came to the United States in the, I'd say, early 70s, late 60s. And she lived in a neighborhood in Brooklyn that was near a Chinese enclave community. And even though she lived here for 20, 30 years, she never learned English because she never had to use it. She can go to the Chinese grocery store and get what she needed. She can go to the Chinese shoemaker and get her shoes fixed. And so when she passed away just a few years ago, the only things she knew how to say in English were, please, thank you, how are you, and good morning.
But today, learning English gives us the flexibility to live and work wherever we choose.
The new immigrants coming to the United States are very concerned that they become United States citizens. So many of them are taking time out early in the morning, mid-afternoon, and late in the evenings to attend English as a second language and also to learn how to become a United States citizen.
Citizenship, the right to work and prosper from our own labors, has always been a core desire of the Chinese people. Even when laws restricted the work we could do, we found a way to make a living.
The family business is the Chinese laundry business, which Chinese hand laundry business, which I guess there are very few of today. But my father and my grandfathers all ran Chinese laundries, and ours was in the Bronx. It was sort of an outpost. I think we were one of only 5 or 6 Chinese families that I knew of in the immediate neighborhood. We lived in the back of the laundry, and there was a curtain and a curtain doorway between the business part and the living part. But I think as the business did well, my father finally did buy a house in the immediate neighborhood.
My father came to San Francisco in 1927, and his first job was as a worker at the Fairmont Hotel on Nob Hill. So boy, he started big time. And over the next several years, he worked very hard and saved his money. And then eventually he opened a restaurant called the New Eastern Cafe in Chinatown, Oakland.
When we were growing up, my mother always cooked in a little kitchen in the patio on the 3rd floor. And I used to sit right outside the kitchen on the floor and watch my mom don't cook. So when I was growing up, I always asked a lot of questions about America. So when I was 13 years old, my mother, she never spoke a word of English. One day she said, "Martin, get lost." So I left home and I went to Hong Kong, and later on I was trained in Hong Kong as a cook in a Chinese restaurant. And then after that I came over to California and go and get a job in a Chinese restaurant. And I said, any job you can give me, I'll work. So I start wash dishes, working in big. They don't trust me as a cook. And then later on, I guess I broke so many dishes, they started to promote me to be a cook, to be a chef.
Restaurants were the means of support for many of our extended families. we quickly learned how to appeal to American tastes.
We've had to serve Americans egg foo young, chop suey, fortune cookies. All these things are Chinese Americans made up here in America, because the genuine thing might be too difficult to swallow, literally, for non-Chinese. But if the culture and the basic product is good, people will want to try it, and it'll come to the fore, as Chinese food has.
The American Chinese food patron is today very much more sophisticated than they were 20 years ago. And therefore, when they come to Chinatown, nothing will offend this certain group of people more than when the waiter puts a fork, at his place setting. So he puts a fork there and he says, "Hey, you think I can't use chopsticks?"
For many years, Cantonese-style cuisine from southern China was being served in most family restaurants.
But in recent years, a lot of influx of immigrants from Taiwan, from northern China, from Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, all over the place. And then now all of a sudden you have other regional cuisines appearing in different restaurants. Like today we tried the Hunan cuisine. And one of my favorite, I'm quite sure one of your favorite, or many Americans' favorite, is the Sichuan cuisine, which is hot and spicy. But they're also the famous Beijing cuisine, like the Peking duck, the pot sticker, and the mushu pork, and all of that, and also the Shanghai cuisine. So actually, there are a lot of different regional cuisines, because in the old days, because of transportation and communication, each region actually developed their own cuisines.
My nightmare in Chinatown is when I see a family and they go to a Chinese restaurant, let's say there's 4 people, and they each go, "Oh, I'll have beef with broccoli." And then they'll say, "Oh, that sounds good, I'll have beef with broccoli." They order 4 beef with broccoli, it comes out, the waiter opens it up, there are 4 of the same dish, and everybody's eating one dish with one flavor. Okay, Chinese family style eating is, let's get 1 beef dish, 1 chicken dish, one seafood, lobster, shrimp, 1 fish dish. Now you have a complete range of stuff, and everybody takes a little of whatever's there.
We also work very hard at balancing our diets. We Chinese live to 80, 90, 100 because we believe in steaming a lot of our fish and foods. We use a lot of our herbal ingredients to steam food.
For most Chinese, particularly tradition, like my mother and a lot of millions of Chinese in China or in the old days, and they learn to understand holistic healing, and they understand preventive medicine. So rather than, now go to the doctor because you got sick, we always have incorporate herbs, Chinese herbs, into a lot of meals, particularly soup and casseroles. And so a lot of the food, a lot of the soup, a lot of the ingredients I incorporate into this to make like a tonic water, basically tonic soups.
The soups may have brought us health, but as the Cantonese say, "Fu hao liang yok." Good medicine tastes bitter.
In our household where I grew up, my grandfather did the cooking. We tend to like Chinese food. We need bowls of rice. One of the first shocks I had at the Air Force Academy was they didn't serve rice. They served potatoes. I didn't really eat potatoes when I grew up. That was a culture shock for me. It sounds kind of funny.
Cooking is a perfect example of what I expect my mother to do, because there is no better cook in my mind than my mother. And in fact, we reminisced about this. Growing up, she regularly had dinner parties for 40, 50 people and cooked every dish on her own completely. They all arrived on the table exactly at the same time, piping hot, fresh off the wok. And I keep asking her how she managed to do this. It is very Joy Luck Club. She would act very modest and say, "Oh, it really was no work." And I did see her slaving away for most of the day, but she was able to pull it off, and she was a working woman as well.
Going to Chinatown on the weekend was one ritual we all look forward to.
Every Sunday, my father would put on his best suit and put on a dapper hat, and we would all get dressed up. My mother would put her makeup on, and she had just gotten her hair done at the beauty parlor on Saturday. And on Sunday, as a family, we would travel down to Chinatown in Manhattan. And in Chinatown, there were a couple of mandatory stops we had to make. One would be to the Chin Family Association offices. And you go there and you catch up on news of the clan. Then we would also go to a restaurant and we would have tea and a snack called dim sum.
Dim sum has two meanings. In Chinese, dim means point or to touch. Sum means the heart. So dim sum means point to the heart or touch of the heart. So all these little dumplings are to fill your heart. You eat it, you feel so joyful.
And I want to have some tea.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, let's enjoy this a little bit.
Okay, let's do that. Wow,
And
this is
let's
great.
do this a little bit. You come to Chinatown, not only you learn a little bit more about Chinese food, about Chinese culture, but about how Chinese people live and how they have struggled and succeeded. And I think you can get a lot more if you spend a few days and just walk around Chinatown, talk to Chinese people, and make some friends and share Chinese food and Chinese culture.
San Francisco's Chinatown celebrates New Year's with a day-long festival. A fashion show adds a modern touch, but the high point is a traditional lion's dance. It's the biggest celebration in local history. Communist China has banned the holiday, but free Chinese welcome the Year of the Serpent, 4,561, with a bang. The crackle of firecrackers frightens off evil spirits, for today, the evil of the past is set aside, and Chinese everywhere look to the coming year with hope in their hearts.
This last parade, we have 650,000 people attend this parade, and it was televised live for the last 10 years on television, so millions of people see it. It's the third most watched parade in the nation. And then because of this parade, schools all over the nation realize, oh, it's that time of the year, it's Chinese New Year, we better take out the history book and talk about the many other great things that the Chinese have contributed to this country.
What I felt growing up was that the Chinese community is there, it's a cocoon, it supports you, but for some reason you're not recognized for your achievements until the mainstream American community recognizes you.
I have to admit that I wanted to have something to do with buildings because I was just excited with the idea of seeing buildings coming up. Suzhou, for those who know China would know Suzhou, which is 50-some miles from Shanghai. It's famous for its gardens. And my family owned one of those famous gardens. So I had a bit of that in me, I think. It still stayed with me, you know, the idea of garden, architecture, nature, and building. But honestly, I did not know that there were so many professions connected with the building business. I really did not know. I had to choose afterwards. I said, do you want to be an engineer? Or do you want to be a builder? Or do you want to be an architect? I had to choose. I wasn't aware of that when I left China.
Many of us did not know what to expect when we left China. But to a great extent, our Chinese heritage shaped our destiny in America.
When I was only 7 or 8 years old, in our textbook on Chinese language, we had a story about a beggar whose name was Wu Xun. And he was so poor, and he begged in order to raise money to build a school for poor kids. And that story impressed me greatly. And I thought, my, this is the best profession. And I thought someday I would like to become a teacher.
Our parents taught us that being educated was an important part of being Chinese. It was not an easy lesson, but it was one we learned well.
Our parents would send us off to school, you know, essentially the objectives that we were going for in school was not simply socializing or making friends or entertaining ourselves, but getting good grades. And the reason for that was that we were born to succeed. That was something that our parents impressed upon us at a very early age. And it's something which was tough to live up to and tough to live down at the same time.
To the extent that Asians are making strides in this country right now, or seem focused in school or whatever, I still feel that that has to do with kind of a first generation immigrant mentality, which and a lot of the people, not everybody, but many of the people who have come more recently from Asia have come from more educated backgrounds, and therefore have placed a certain value on it, on college and education, and that is a stepping stone to advancement.
Unlike other immigrants, we could not simply change our name and disguise our accent to avoid prejudice. But our hard work and focus on education paid off. Doors began to open.
When I worked for a congressman one summer, between my junior year and senior year, I discovered that Capitol Hill was a very exciting place. And I watched the reporters doing what they were doing. Also, this member of Congress happened to be a former journalist. He was a former newspaper man. So he got me interested in writing. I wrote some press releases for him. When I went back in the fall, I decided to major in journalism. When I started at CBS News, I was hired along with 3 other women at a time when there was a heavy push to hire women and there was a heavy push to hire minorities. I think that I knew I was filling that slot, and I think the rest of us, the others knew that as well. But at the same time, we had so much to prove. We were given a rough time from everyone, from the interviewee to the camera people with whom we were working, to producers or whatever. And we didn't know, when people were giving us a hard time, why they were giving us a hard time. People would make jokes about yellow journalism. Again, I would make jokes before they did. I think those early days were hard in many ways because we all went through a hazing period. I think all of us came out the other end smarter, tougher, more experienced, and we learned from the best, actually.
Just thinking back to younger days, I'm clearly affected by the Asian culture, the appreciation for scholarly work and for education. But as I came to this country, I also appreciated the merits of this system, the technical know-how, the entrepreneurship, and for me, it's the fusion of 2 cultures. I knew what I wanted to do. Our world is composed of molecules that are stuck together by certain chemical bonds. I mean, these were things that captured my imagination, and I wanted somehow to pursue science to uncover something that no one knew before.
Under Dr. Ho's guidance, his staff of scientists uncovered the secret of HIV replication and developed a combination drug therapy that's helping AIDS patients live longer. In science, medicine, architecture, the creative arts, and other fields, we have begun to make our mark.
I didn't ever imagine I would be a Hollywood producer. I didn't even want to live in Los Angeles. Everything just happened because I was following my nose in a strange way. And I wanted to go live in China, which I did. I wanted to then bring Chinese films over to North America because I thought, well, here's a way to show Westerners that not all Chinese look and sound the same. Then I was asked to bring American films to China because there were very few people who actually could parlay between the 2 film industries. I was asked to work on Steven Spielberg's film Empire of the Sun. And then I heard Oliver Stone was looking for somebody to work for his company, and I had met him, and he was interested in Chinese films actually, and I met him because I would have Chinese film festivals. And so that partnership lasted for 7 years, and by then I had to kind of acknowledge that I was working in Hollywood and living in Los Angeles. And now I'm in partnership with a woman named Lisa Henson, who's the daughter of Jim Henson, and we have a production company of our own.
Our lives and loves have inspired books, films, and plays that have won international acclaim.
When I was 10, my maternal grandmother became ill, and we thought she was going to pass away. And she was the only one of that generation who really seemed to remember all the family stories. And somehow it seemed important to me at that age, and I worried that if she passed, the stories would be lost also. So I asked my parents if I could spend a summer with her in the Philippines, where she was living at the time. And they agreed, and I did what I guess would now be called oral histories, and then came back home to the States and compiled them into kind of a 90-page, novel, which got Xeroxed and distributed to my family and got very good reviews. And then I put that away for a number of years, and my grandmother did not, in fact, pass away. She's still alive today, but several years ago, I went back to that book and used it as source material for my play Golden Child, which was on Broadway last season.
No, none of my daughters are going to end up spinsters, understand? The world is changing.
I was seeking an international banking career after having studied international finance and political economies of several parts of the world, from Europe and Asia and so forth. I thought I was fairly well qualified, and my professors told me that. So I made application to many of the banking institutions who at that time basically told me that positions of the type I was seeking for were basically not open to Asians.
Dismayed but undeterred, Henry Tang spent the next 25 years breaking barriers and cultivating important relationships in international business, finance, and politics.
The world has changed a great deal. I think the perception of business in Asia, business in Europe, clearly can be handled by Asian Americans, and I'm glad that that has happened.
We've even broken new ground in the publishing world with a magazine devoted to our experiences, views, and ideas.
About midway through my sophomore year, I realized that I was not going to be a doctor, that I had no dreams or hopes of doing this sort of thing, and as a result broke it to my parents, to the fact that I was not going to follow the family trade, as it were, and I was going to do my own thing. And what I recognized my own thing was writing and reporting, and in particular, I think, exploring this community of Asian Americans. I mean, Chinese Americans had always been around in America, but the idea that we had something in common with other ethnicities, that was something still a little novel. I somehow managed to essentially coerce, seduce, whatever you want to say, 3 friends of mine from college, and that summer we pounded out a business plan for what would become A Magazine. Well, it's now 10 years since the idea first made itself known, and since the very first issue crawled out of the primordial muck, as it were. And we are now thriving.
Today, our faces are counted among America's celebrities. And while many of us are respected here and abroad for our achievements, it wasn't always so.
Right after college, when I graduated from Illinois, I came to New York and worked for the Voice of America. And they asked me what kind of program I would like to write. And I said, oh, I would like to report on what the Chinese are doing in this country. But when I went out to look for information, I found that everything that was written about the Chinese in the U.S. was a holdover from the exclusion days, where Americans collected information about how undesirable the Chinese were. And so everything was written toward the aspect of getting them excluded. And all of this was so horrifying that my hair literally stood on end. I said, these are not my people. These are not the way I know them. And so I said, I have to correct this image.
After 5 years of reporting on the Chinese American experience for radio, Betty Lee Sung wrote Mountain of Gold in 1967, which inspired many colleges to introduce programs devoted to Asian American studies.
This photo exhibit that I have at the Chinese Historical Society depicts a history of 30 years ago when many of us went out to San Francisco State University and assisted the student to close down the university because there was grievances on lack of Afro-American studies, Native American study, Hispanic studies, and Asian American history studies classes that reflects our history of those of us who are born and who were raised and grew up here in the United States.
Asian American studies have helped shine the spotlight on our achievements, and the larger American community has begun taking notice. Our presence is even being felt in politics, an area we have traditionally shied away from.
In the past, if you go very back into China's history, if you stood up too tall and spoke too loudly, the emperor just cut your head off. If you were too successful of a general because they were afraid of success, they cut your head off. I mean, it was very Darwinian. I mean, I think you learn to duck.
Like other groups, we've found the need to address our grievances has drawn us into the democratic process.
That's how I met Rose in one of those public hearings for the housing issue. And he says, Rose, what's going on? How come nobody speaks for us? And later on, people try to tell us, because you guys don't vote. Nobody is care for you. Nobody representing your group, your Asian community. And that's how we started.
The show is a Cantonese show. We try to be a bridge between the East and the West. Between the generation. A lot of people come from various Asian countries who are Cantonese speaking. They have no idea what it means to live in a democracy, really, except they go to work, they come home, they pay the taxes, they pay the bills. But how to survive in a democracy, and what does democracy mean, and what does it mean to be a good citizen, and how to participate civically.
The ethic of public service was something that wasn't normally found in a traditional Chinese family. My mother started off in the PTA, became president, and then ran for one school board elections, and then ran for one state assembly, and then became Secretary of State. There's no other place in the world like America. We don't believe in limits. We believe if you have the freedom and you have the opportunity and the energy and the dedication, you can achieve great things.
Matt Fong, a fourth-generation Californian, a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. His good work as California State Treasurer is earning national praise and setting a new standard of service.
To succeed in American politics, however, we've had to play by American rules and shed some of our cultural inhibitions.
Well, we were very close to entering the ultimate Washington corridor of power, winning a tough election as the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate from California. Was a tremendous victory and honor, and almost knocking off Barbara Boxer, the incumbent, was something we almost were able to achieve.
We haven't assumed a high profile in public service, but we never shirked our duty to our country.
During the Second World War, many Chinese American men entered into the military service, many in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And they served abroad in the Pacific as well as in Europe. And many of the wives served in the industry, in the war industry, in shipyards. And during the Second World War, I remember my mother was very active in the women's auxiliary that were rolling up bandages and raising money for the war against Japan.
I know my father was in the Army Air Corps, okay? He was a master sergeant. He had a whole bunch of his pals who grew up together in the neighborhood and then went off. They were in World War II together, were in the Army Air Corps, and particularly this group from New York, Chinatown, and were the ground crew for the Flying Tigers. There is an American Legion post in Chinatown, and it was named after a Chinese American who was a pilot, died in action, and somebody provided us with a photograph of that gentleman.
Like so many other immigrants, we struggled and we overcame. Our special privilege is to come from a great and ancient culture. Our special burden is to live up to the sacrifices and expectations of those who came before us. In all walks of life, we're succeeding. Not only have we learned to appreciate what it means to be American, but through our skills, our industry, and our quiet dignity, we've helped Americans begin to appreciate what it means to be Chinese.
The Chinese Americans was brought to you by the Charles B. Wang Foundation, which shares public television's mission of bringing to viewers the highest accomplishments of our society, along with an understanding of its rich diversity and the commonality of its people. If you would like a VHS copy of this program, call 1-800-847-7793.
Like the popular tradition of dim sum, we have wrapped up a collection of tasty morsels of Chinese American wisdom, memories, and storytelling. We hope you enjoy them.
The Chinese culture for the Chinese is quite important. The Chinese is very proud of their culture. We can say it's about 2,000-3,000, but although some Chinese say it's 4,000 or 5,000 years old. It's so strong that there are several dynasties where foreigners invaded, like the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols invaded China, but they became Chinese. And then the Qing dynasty, the Manchus invaded China in 1644 and dominated China until 1911. But in many ways, they became Chinese. And it's this culture that the Chinese feel that sustain them, help them survive. So I don't think most Chinese, especially immigrants, have a problem with being proud of their culture. I've always had that sense. My parents always instilled that in me, that the culture sustains you. Values like value for education, respect for elder, and obligation. These are very good values that help one through life. Plus the art, the food, wonderful food.
Food is the most important thing for all people, and the dumpling is has a long history. You know, it takes both the East and West to make dumplings. China had wheat and rice for a long time, but it didn't have stone meal until probably the 2nd century BC, and that was imported to China from Central Asia. And then Chinese people could grind that wheat and rice, and then make flour and make dough. Then you can put some kind of fillings inside, and the fillings can be all kinds of filling, you know, and you can, and some vegetables, some meat, some whatever, shrimp or ground fish, and that's very nutritious. It's a full meal. You can make them and eat them, and share them with your family or friend, or eat by yourself, and they're all delicious. And also, dumpling has certain kind of symbol, traditional belief in that Chinese people eat dumplings for New Year because dumpling, the shape of dumpling is like a ingot, and you know, gold piece and silver piece, and so eat dumpling is to get good luck. And sometimes people put a penny inside a dumpling, and whoever gets that penny is going to be fabulously rich the next year.
A lot of people ask me, besides Chinese food, what's your favorite? I would say that equally, my favorite is also Italian food, because there's a lot of similarity between Chinese and Italian cuisine. In fact, the Chinese eat just as much garlic, just as much noodle and pasta as the Italian. A lot of people ask me, who started pasta first, whether the Chinese or the Italian? And I want to tell everybody, watch this program. Actually, this is the story, the beginning of pasta. When Marco Polo went to China, he was invited into the imperial kitchen and learned how to make mean. In China, all the wheat flour noodle is called mean, and the rice noodle is called fan. When Marco Polo learned how to make mean, he went back to Italy. He decided to learn how to make a lot of mean to entertain his guests and neighbors and friends and neighborhood and all the business associates. And everybody is having such a good time. Marco Polo's uncle getting a little bit drunk and say, Marco, please pass the mean. Please pass the mean. This is how pasta started.
When I was 12 years old, my mother took me on an unexplained trip to Chinatown. The reason why my mother had brought me there was because apparently worried that I was never going to grow beyond the height of 5 feet. She had been told by, I think one of my aunts or great aunts, that there was a concoction that she could create that would stimulate, I guess, the growth essence within me. And this required, among other things, a fresh bird, not a Purdue packaged oven stuffer roaster. So the only place to go for this sort of thing was this live poultry mart. So I walked in there with my mother and was looking around at the birds and at people, wearing again their butcher's aprons. And I guess it still hadn't quite hit me what was going on. But my mother told me to pick one out. So I did, a nice fluffy one, thinking, well, this is great. Maybe it's a new pet. And the next thing I knew, this bird was being removed and hastily taken out back and brought back to us in a brown paper bag. And that was traumatic enough. But after we got home, my mother cooked it in a soup with some sort of just toxic herb, something that was both bitter and sour at the same time, and forced me to consume this thing. And the reason she gave was that somehow or other, the hormones of the chicken and the chemicals in the herb would stimulate growth, and as a result, I'd shoot up inches the next year. And of course, I don't know whether to account for my eventual attaining of 5'7" to the death of this poor bird, or simply, the standard development that one goes through at puberty, but. Either way, it made me realize that there was a lot about Chinese culture that I didn't understand, know, or had never even heard of at that time. And it was, well, at the time it was appalling, but later it became intriguing.
I think in life, if you don't have a sense of humor, you can't survive. Really cannot. So to me, I'm not speaking for other Chinese. To me, I think it's very important to have a sense of humor, which means that you like to look at the world with a certain amount of tolerance. And at the same time, nothing is eternal. And why not enjoy it while you can? I do like the idea of sense of humor. I'm not so sure I have it. You know, when you have it, it's a wonderful thing. Some people are blessed with it. They exude it. I don't. But I like it. I enjoy it. I enjoy company. It doesn't matter whether they're Americans or French or Chinese, if they have a sense of humor. In fact, I pick my friends that way. I pick my friends to those friends of mine are usually ones that have that sense of humor. I think that's important.
The holiday where you visit the graves is called Qingming. And Chinese believe in ancestor worship. That's the folk belief. The belief is that it's not heaven or hell that you go to after death, but you just go to the afterlife. And in the afterlife, it's not a great place. It's all hell. In the afterlife, you're dependent upon your descendants to provide for you. Now, I have an uncle and my grandfather buried in the cemetery in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And when we were children, we would go to the cemetery on this particular day, and we would set up incense and glasses of wine and food in front of the grave to pay your respects to the ancestors. And then you would also burn things as offerings, let's say. And you would burn paper money, you would burn other kinds of paper replicas of objects or gifts that they might need in the afterlife. My uncle, who served in the war and died in North Africa during the war, is buried in the cemetery, and he was a heavy smoker. So I remember when we would go visit the cemetery that we would burn packs of cigarettes for him as an offering. And then recently, my mother and I went to the cemetery for our annual pilgrimage, and she'd forgot the pack of cigarettes for my uncle. Now, my uncle's been dead about 40 years. And I said, well, you forgot the cigarettes for him. And this is great. Her response was, smoking's not good for you. He should cut down anyway.
I always thought that the Chinese were very serious, that they didn't have a sense of humor. And someone said to me, it all has to do with the idiosyncrasies, knowing the language, knowing the culture, and then we can be funny, but you don't get it. And then a lot of people who are Chinese who lived here for 40 years still don't get the sitcoms or the joking that goes on. And can you talk to me about that whole, because I think we miss each other with what's funny sometimes, you know?
Yeah, that's the cultural barrier, you know. For example, I have one singer. His last name is in Chinese is Deng, like the
Deng Xiaoping.
Deng, okay. And when he was for the citizenship because his hearing is not so good. He's already 84, 85, and the examiner asked him, "What's the name of our national father?" He only name. Ask my name. 我姓邓. He's speaking Chinese. 我姓邓, but to the officer, listen. Washington. Okay, so you pass. You did not get that, but.
My father worked a number of government jobs for Chiang Kai-shek, who was head of the nationalist government at the time. And he worked for the Chinese CIA, he worked various jobs, but mostly for Chiang Kai-shek in the diplomatic service or arms of the diplomatic service. And it was always a mystery. When he was working for the Chinese CIA, it was always a mystery as to what he was doing, and my mother was always very suspicious of him. You know, where are you going? What are you doing? And he would never tell her. My parents actually, they moved in, when they were in China, they moved south towards the Sichuan province, and they lived there for a little while, and then my father wanted to take the family to the United States, and he asked his parents and her parents, do you want to go? And they didn't want to go. So he came. He came first, and then my mother and my 4 sisters went to India for a short while, and they were waiting to get word from him to get on board a ship and come. And if you can well imagine, it was so difficult for my mother. There she was with just, 4 little girls, and was waiting to get word from my father. And finally he, said, okay, get on this ship. They arrived in New York, Ellis Island, all of that. And and then my father came to Washington. He was working, by then, 45, I guess, towards the end of the war. He couldn't work for the nationalist government anymore. The communists eventually took over, and so my father started working for an arm of the United Nations. Did that for a while. Eventually, he got his citizenship, and when he got his citizenship, he began working for the United States government, for the federal government, and he had to find an entirely new profession. So what he did was he discovered that when you add up numbers, they come out the same, whether you're doing it on an abacus or an adding machine. And so he became an accountant and then a financial manager. And he would use his abacus, and I still have it. It's a beautiful old abacus, and I remember how he used to go click, 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 and count up numbers in the most extraordinary way. Have you ever seen how wonderfully an abacus works? And that's what he did until he died in 1990.
My relationship with my parents is close, or maybe not so close, depending on whose vantage point you're looking at it from. They're very Chinese, but not extremely traditional Chinese. So by Chinese standards, I think we have a pretty easygoing relationship. By American standards, I think Chinese parents tend to be very, very intense, have a lot of expectations, and have a very deep-seated sense of what is right and what is wrong, what's moral, what's immoral, what's good, what's bad. So that is something that has existed in Chinese culture for thousands of years, and I don't think anyone born and raised in China can really rid themselves of those very, very hard-earned beliefs very easily.
When children come to the United States and they enter at a younger age, or the American-born who are here, come into a culture which is totally different from what they grew up with or what they were taught. Especially American-born children, they don't know the Chinese culture at all, whereas their parents cling to their ways. And one of them, let me give you an example. One of them is family obligation. How much do you owe? How much? What is your duty to the family? And family in this sense is not only means the nuclear family, the father and mother and your siblings, but also a much larger extended family. So when the parents say, we want you to do this, do you go along with them? Or do you absorb the American way, which is individualism, me first, what's in my best interest? Whereas in the Chinese culture, it's what's in the family's best interest. So if the parents say, I don't want you to marry a Westerner, a Caucasian, then does your love for this woman or man take precedence over their desires? Or if they say, I have to send so much money to my uncle or grandpa in China, does that take precedence over your wish for a stereo or some special clothing or going to a dance or a car? How much do you owe the family, and how much should you embark on your own special interest, your own individual interests? So the family obligation, the duty to the family, is a big cultural conflict for those born in the United States and are imbued with Western thought.
In the courtyard outside the Chinatown YMCA, we have a mural that depicts the early arrival of the men that left their homes and villages in the southern part of China and labor in the gold mines, in the railroads, in the delta, clearing out the swamp, and many difficult work. So this mural is commemorating the very difficult lives that these men had while they were in the United States. Their wives and children were left in the village and in different parts of China, and they sacrificed their life from being separated from their families, and life for them was very harsh. So in San Francisco, as well as in New York and other cities that have large settlements of Chinese people, we started the Family Association. So in San Francisco, we have what we know as the Chinatown 6 Company. It used to be known as the 8 Company because it reflected the 8 provinces of which these men came from. So these Family Association, District Association, was a safe haven for these single men that had to spend all their life. For example, my uncle, who came here in 1949, did not see his wife until 1980. So it's a matter of a long separation for him. And there are many, many stories like this, like my uncle.
I remember when I was a child, I enjoyed reading about the stories of the Monkey King and the journeys to the West, the adventures of this monkey. I don't know if it had to do with the fact that I was born in the year of the monkey, but this was, you know, a character who was unusually curious and reckless. And I remember loving those stories when I was a child. And as a special monkey god figure, he had incredible powers. He could tear out a handful of his hair, stuff it in his mouth, and spit it out, and there'd be hundreds of monkeys dancing around. So, and I was attracted to those stories because I felt that while this monkey had incredible mischievous qualities about him, he was basically also a very, you know, idealistic and committed figure. I mean, who had really had paid a lot, you know, the price of being totally irresponsible early on, and had he was punished by the gods, and eventually became a very brave, courageous individual who was constantly saving the lives of his comrades around him, and always had the ultimate vision, which was to complete this journey to the West in search of Buddhist truth. So, so I remember that that particular story as being quite amusing for me as a child.
Well, I think exoticism is sort of a problematic idea. I mean, exoticism is attractive to a lot of people because it implies, or say a lot of Westerners, because it implies something so different. And yet at the same time, the extremity of that difference can also serve to dehumanize people. That is, if these people are from another planet, to some extent they're not human. And I think that it's a very tricky balance that one walks. I think when I did M. Butterfly, my play on Broadway about 10 years ago, I was trying to deal with that question of exoticism in terms of dramatizing this true story about a French diplomat who had a 20-year affair with an actress, Chinese actress, who turned out to be A, spy, and B, a man in drag. And the diplomat claimed that he never knew the true gender of his lover. And to me, that is both the, that's sort of a very extreme metaphor for both the attraction of exoticism, that is, the notion that this French diplomat felt that he had found some sort of exotic lover, and yet also the disadvantages of that degree of difference. That is, if you don't know so much so that you can even be unsure about the actual gender of your lover, then certainly the notion of exoticism serves not only to, can potentially serve not only to dehumanize Asian people, but also it can serve to really confuse Western people and give Westerners a perspective on things in Asia, events, people, that's not that useful.
A couple of years ago, I became the full-time director for the New York Chinese Cultural Center. Or up until that point, it was pretty much a volunteer-run organization. And we also brought on board, as our current school director, a woman by the name of Bei Gu. And Bei herself had just come to this country in 1986. And back in China, she was a national dance star. She is an expert in the Chinese sword dance. And the way I can describe her is she was the Baryshnikov of sword dance in China. In fact, there are people of her generation that I know, and I will ask them, oh, do you know Bei Gu? Because she's also from Shanghai. And these people would say, well, I don't know her, but I know of her. And it's kind of amazing to me that somebody would be a star of that stature and then come to this country. And basically, she was trying to dance, she was trying to teach dance, but in the off hours, she was a housekeeper. She would clean houses. And I think you find that with a lot of immigrants in New York. But Bei, I think, was kind of amazing to come from being an exalted star to being a housekeeper. But we've tried to create a place for her. We've tried to create a place for Chinese dance within the American dance world, among the American cultural community. And what our program does is it uses dance and music to introduce Chinese culture to people who are not familiar with it. The program starts off with the Northern Lion Dance. The Northern Lion Dance is done with two people in a lion suit. And they do all sorts of tricks, jumping and leaping and rolling on the ground. And it's usually done for festivals and celebrations. The other dance that we'll be doing is a Mongolian dance, part of China that very few people ever get to visit. It's way in the north. People in Mongolia are herders. They herd cattle and sheep. And the dances that they do have wide sweeping arm movements that are supposed to represent the birds that are flying overhead. There's also a very distinctive movement of the shoulders that imitate the way your shoulders move when you're galloping on a horse. And then the other distinctive thing about Mongolian dances is they dance with eating utensils. So parts of the dance, the women balance rice bowls on their head. Other times they use chopsticks or ceramic wine cups to imitate the galloping of horses across the wide open plains of Mongolia. Another dance that we do on the program is the red silk ribbon dance. Now, a lot of people think of this dance as being particularly representative of Chinese dances. But actually, the red silk ribbon dance was choreographed in the 1950s in mainland China. But it has a long tradition. The silk ribbons, some people believe, are an extension of the long sleeves that people used to have on their robes in ancient times. Women used to wear long sleeves to cover their hands. And men used to wear the long sleeves if they were wealthy to show people that they were rich and they didn't have to do manual labor. And some people think this dance started with those sleeves, that they just became more elongated. Because when you had those long sleeves, what you would do is you would throw them in the air and catch them in your hands while you walked, so they wouldn't drag on the ground. And then when you'd sit down, you'd throw them out and let them rest on your lap. So some people think that that very graceful dance started with these sleeves. That's a very beautiful dance. We're using long strips of silk. The dancers create images of rainbows and clouds and fireworks.